time, pause it, walk up to characters, plaques pop up to tell you who they were, shows you all 4 flights that actually happened that day and who the pilots were, shows you, it will eventually show you a particle simulation that gives you a diagram of the science of lift, thrust, and drag, which are the core components of flight, and a ton of other things that are really cool and educational that if the Smithsonian decides to put this in their exhibit, I think will blow people away.
You mentioned this is for Vive or Crescent Bay, correct?
Yeah, well, we originally designed it for Vive, and then it turned out to be kind of difficult to get one. And so, so then we went to Crescent Bay, and then we didn't get one of those until maybe a week before ship.
For those that don't know, it's a pretty specialized audience, so I'm assuming a lot of people know. But for those that don't know, Crescent Bay is the code name for the next generation of Oculus Rift.
Oculus's headset, yeah. So we knew we kind of had our target. We had some alpha hardware and some beta software that showed up very late.
What do you see as, just to build on that for a minute, what do you see as the difference between doing Vive production and doing more doing immersive production for Vive for Crescent Bay and doing more flat production for Gear VR or for traditional 360 video?
Well, that actually is a really interesting question and one that we're exploring pretty deeply. I mean, I have an entire matrix spreadsheet of all the different potential authoring tools and then all the potential distribution platforms. And we're basically drawing lines between them and saying, okay, well, if we do this for this or if we do this for this authoring tool, it's not going to be able to work on this distribution platform, right? So there's a lot of work being done, I think, on that right now. But generally, as a company, we're platform agnostic, and we're going to be designing content to basically run on all of them at some level.
Deepak, with Ziality coming out and with the distribution platform coming out, how do you plan on attracting, with all the different headsets and all the different technologies out there, how do you plan on attracting people to a unified experience?
I think it starts a lot of times with the people who actually influence communities of users first, right? And so you take Katy Perry as an example. She commands an audience. And so using and leveraging the power of that influence and helping them, users, start to experience the ability to just do this. And I think to your point, how do you, as a creative, narrate something where you can actually look around? To some degree, you need some sort of a focal point. Otherwise, you end up just kind of aimlessly looking around. And so that can be done either through what we see as in directing or social engagement, as an example. So, what's my friends looking at behind me, and can we tag the content in that way? But what's interesting is that, again, we're looking at a complete different perspective in that adoption is key, right? Adoption of just this new medium. And we did a recent project, Lucas, for Reebok and CrossFit, and one of the things that we aimed to do was just share with regular people who walk around the street that you can actually look around in an environment and get as many people using that as possible at the CrossFit Games, using influencers like Jason Khalipa or Alexis Davis, who are well known in those communities. And to me, I think leveraging those brands who are influencers may be some of the best ways to go at this.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
I mean, to Lucas, your point, it's a combination of a hits-based kind of phenomenon plus some sort of unique user experience, right? And the intersection of those two is really where the it is. And we haven't found the it.
Fair enough. And everybody up here is talking about, it sounds like fan-based ecosystems of some kind. It's all communities of interest and people reaching out to those communities of interest. And Jack, obviously, features have giant communities of interest. What do you see as sort of a short-term and long-term strategy for VR and theatrical? Do you think we'll ever get to a day where somebody like where A-list directors, where a Doug Lyman is going to be directing a feature entirely for a VR headset, or do you always see it as an ancillary part of the feature world?
I think from the marketing standpoint, it's hard to speak to the filmmakers and their craft in shooting long-form, feature-length film, but certainly in terms of shorter-form marketing content that really can stand alone as content, we know that we have artists who are very open to the idea. They want to learn more. And part of our job is really to make them understand what the possibilities are. In the short term, I would love to be able to actually shoot and cut a trailer in VR where you are in the shoes of the protagonist and you are being led through a narrative that is representative of the feature film, even if the feature film isn't shot entirely in VR. I think that would be a really interesting way to sort of immerse the viewer into the shoes of the protagonist and identify more with the character, feel that they're actually in the world and leading the storyline. But that story narrative is actually really important for us. And if a 2.5-minute trailer doesn't lend itself all that well to the way that VR is best utilized, maybe it could be even shorter form. We are, in our world, we are always looking for not just 2.5 minutes to tell a story of what a story is, but also 30 seconds, now 15 seconds, increasingly more, 10 seconds, 6 seconds. So just having the opportunity to be able to use it, one, as an attention-grabbing sort of device, but then not to rely solely on a device. I don't know how many of you all saw the VR experience created for The Walk. It really looked phenomenal, but having been on the marketing side before and having had to work on movies where you've had to sell, I don't want to use the word gimmick, but having to sell more of a device as opposed to an entire story is very challenging, because ultimately the viewer of a feature-length film wants to know what narrative they're going to experience when they spend their money. And so instead of just transporting them into an environment, you really want to be able to tell them how they're going to be entertained from a storytelling perspective. So that's always going to be priority number one for us. And the sort of so aside from the storytelling, then the actual 360 experience and what that looks like is really just icing for us.
Makes sense. And I'll
if I could just add a second to that.
Go for it.
I'll just simply say that we've engaged more than a dozen A-list Hollywood directors and writers to come in and work on stuff, and they're all extremely interested, even in the short form.
So actually, I wanted to get some other opinions from all you guys, because you guys are all working on short form experiences. What do you see as the future of VR in terms of long form content, in terms of reaching that barrier?
We're talking a lot about sort of like needing to find, that magic moment in which VR makes sense and everyone likes it, or everyone likes it, but it blows up on a massive scale. But I think there's not enough people right now that are trying to explore VR as a new medium, and I think that look at web video. All the big players were getting into web video in 2007, 2008, 2009, trying to figure out how to monetize it, trying to figure out how to create content. They ended up just basically doing reality TV or underfunded, crappy TV content for the most part. None of those brains could have thought of unboxing videos or PewDiePie. No studio executive was like, PewDiePie, that's what's gonna blow up. But PewDiePie he's native to the internet. We don't have anybody yet that's native to VR. We have people that are capable of that, but they need money and they need support and they need an audience and they need an ecosystem. It's going to take a while for us to see the new generation, and I firmly do not believe that most A-list Hollywood directors are going to make the transition, because it's a new medium that everything that directors like goes away. All the control of, film directing is all about deciding to the pixel what the audience is going to see on every frame. And VR takes that away from you. And as a medium, it's first person, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. And there's sort of interactivity brings a new thing to the table where you have to enable interaction as much as you possibly can. So there's all these considerations that I don't think are going to jive well with most of the traditional linear film people that are trying to figure out how to do film in VR. I think it's the people who are looking at it and excited about it, and some of those will be A-list folks. Some of them are A-list folks who get it and see that it's a new thing and are trying to figure it out on its own merits, and trying to figure out sort of how can we catch fire within that instead of try to jam something that's already great into it. Film killed vaudeville. There's not a lot of really great vaudeville directors that made it in cinema. Sound killed silent. Like, there's a long history of new mediums, new technologies, or big leaps within an existing technology, leaving a lot of people behind who are only interested in sort of keeping what they have and jamming it into this new box.
I would just add that I think these leaps are evolutionary. I think what you see in filmmakers' capabilities and also the marketplace's ability to absorb a new idea are evolutionary. I think you don't see people making like hydrogen airplanes. What you see is, a car that has a gasoline engine, but it also can run on electric power. And then eventually you see an electric car, and then eventually you see a hydrogen car, and eventually you'll see hydrogen trains, and who knows what else. Maybe you'll see a nuclear fusion powered, car. I don't think it happens all at once. And so the way I look at it, for whatever that's worth, is I'm not looking to make a movie in VR. I don't think it's like talking about an elephant and a grape. They're not the same thing. A movie has, in a way, nothing to do with VR. It's a totally different art form with a different set of rules and capabilities. Half the reason I formed Headcase with my partners was because I couldn't even work on VR without building some of the stuff that you need to work on it. It just simply doesn't exist. R2 over there is just a reaction to I not wanting to spend a lot of time with non-professional tools and an inability to get what I wanted. I needed a tool that could help me get what I want, and that's the fourth generation of that camera that we've worked on with Radiant and Murata. But there's, we're on generation 5 and 6 right now. We're building a man-portable camera. We're building a drone-capable camera, and blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of new tools coming, and those new tools, as they evolve, not just ours, but other people's, will facilitate capabilities that will migrate into movies, and it will, everything will just, all the levels will rise kind of together. But I don't think you're going to see, I don't personally, I made 2 movies with Doug Liman. If I handed him a VR camera, he would start shooting literally right now.
Right.
He would just literally roll out to the lobby and start doing something. He's that type of guy. But I don't think Ridley Scott's going to do that, or a lot of other filmmakers who have, as Andy says, kind of like who want rigid control over what we see. I think you're going to see hybrid products that stand on their own, and that's what should happen, in my opinion, with this medium. That's what we should do with it. It's its own thing. It shouldn't be made to feel like it's something else. And there's frankly not going to be an economic model that resembles movies for VR. It's not the same type of content. So it's going to have a different economic model, I think. And that economic model will inform more of the production than whether Doug or Ridley or whoever wants to do it. It's all about what is the economic model for it. And we will discover that as we go. There's a certain amount of risk involved in doing something new. And some people are willing to take that risk, and you know, these guys that are up here are in that group. And there are plenty of people who are not. I can tell you, I talked to several studio heads with VR labs, and they're not doing anything. They're literally not doing anything. So it's not going to come from the top down. It just will not happen that way.
Deepak, you had a thought?
Yeah, I mean, Lucas, one thing that's interesting is you mentioned evolutionary. I also think, and to piggyback on what you said, it's generational.
Yeah.
So when I say generational, I mean not only from a consumer perspective, but from a content creator perspective. You know, I asked my dad to check out something on a phone, and he's like, "Whoa, you could do that?" I asked my 5-year-old, they're like, "Okay, so what?" Right? I mean, they're going to grow up with the notion of being able to just look around and experience things in 360. It's like when my daughter was 7, she walked up to the big TV doing this, like she can touch it and move shit around. And in the end, she grew up with these types of devices. So that next generation is going to almost demand content that will require a next generation content creator.
Yeah.
Right? And I suspect the next generation content creators, or some of them are probably in this room. And so it's not necessarily the current list of A-list producers or directors, it's what's the next crop?
Yeah.
And how do we support them with ecosystems, you know, tools, funding, whatever they need to be able to actually help drive the market forward, right? Because there's enough money behind consumerization, and 2-year-olds will be 7-year-olds in 5 years.
Yeah.
And they're going to be like, where's the shit? Where I can't look around, man. It's like I can't look at a rectangle. And so
Right.
that's going to happen.
It's also one quick point. I think everybody can wrap their heads around how to shoot 360-degree video very quickly. Any A-list, director, all the people we deal with can understand what it conceptually takes to shoot something in 360 very quickly. But it takes a certain mindset to understand what VR is and what the capabilities of that medium are. And those are the minds that are going to succeed, because it's not about sort of just more cameras. It's about a new language, a new way of interacting.
The
and viewing.
grammar of a 360-degree
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
where it's really more like a play. Like when you're staging, when we were doing The Strain, what we were doing was staging a play. And with that play had to run, unlike in a movie where we're looking this direction and, there's a bunch of guys eating donuts back here and talking on their phones and whatever. In VR and in 360-degree photography, we more or less have to run it all at once as if it's a theatrical play. And that's the challenge of it.
What's cool is that on one spectrum you have things like what you did with The Strain, and then on the other spectrum you have YouTube 360 with videos of cats, right? And so everything in between is where the user gets to, or the consumer gets to experience. And all of it's good, even though some of it's shit, right? So that's what I find kind of really compelling.
Actually, just a quick personal story. I personally had the moment where I thought, okay, this is a market. This is a valid market where I have a 16-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy, so I have my own built-in focus groups. And I saw my daughter's not as much of a geek as I am, but she has a Google Cardboard and she was playing around with it, and she saw the Taylor Swift experience. She saw and she's a huge Taylor Swift fan. She showed her friends and circulated it around, and everybody looked at it for 30 seconds, and then they moved on to the next thing. And like 2 weekends later, I saw one of her friends with a Google Cardboard, and I was like, that's a market. That's how this is going to spread. And if teenage girls are out buying it and doing it and spreading it among themselves, that's a valid market, and I sort of got excited about that. Told her, that's my cue. Yeah. So, excuse me. So this has been some great conversation. I'm curious, sort of for you guys on the creation side. You guys are spending most of your time in the VR world right now. Did you have a particular aha moment when you realized that VR was going to be huge and you wanted to go focus on it or devote some of your life in savings to it? Anybody take it? Lucas?
For me, it's freedom. It really just comes down to, movies are very expensive and television shows are very expensive, and they're made on a very tight schedule, and there's all kinds of imperatives there, and there's not a lot of freedom in that world. It's not like we don't do cool stuff in movies. Still, we do. Not every movie doesn't have to be a superhero movie. We can do things that are really innovative and interesting and original still in movies and television, but it feels somehow like it's getting smaller and harder, and it's extremely expensive to shoot movies, and it's not getting any cheaper. So the thing that's interesting for me, or the thing that activated me, where I had the little light bulb moment, was there's no one who can tell me no. Like, no one knows what you can and can't do in VR, so I can just go do whatever I think is interesting, and I'm going to fail a fair amount, and that's okay. I will learn every time I fail, and I will build on that. And that's, for me, the thing that's cool about VR is we're making it up as we go. We're learning, we're testing. I get to collaborate with lots of interesting people, and pick their brains about, what do you think about this idea? I know it's a harebrained idea, but what if we did this? And they say similar things to me. And that is why I got into the movie business in the first place. I could be, a quant. I have a math brain, and I could, be making $10 trillion, trading stocks. But that doesn't interest me. I'm interested in storytelling, and so this is a place where innovation and storytelling can happen very rapidly. And that's why I want to do it.
Go for it, Andy.
I had two moments. The very first time I tried an Oculus Rift, DK1, which is about 3 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago now. It was, we started writing like an idea within a half hour. It was literally like, how can we film for this? We know how to do HDR spheres. Does that work? I don't know. Let's start. And we started experimenting immediately, shooting little tests on our stage and trying stuff out, and very quickly, discovering some really hard lessons quietly in the back room. And then the second really big sort of, for me, like personally, aha watershed moment. 2 weeks after Jaunt came out of stealth in April of whatever year that was, 2 years ago, we did a quiet internal test with them. So we were the first people outside of Jaunt that had ever seen or used the camera, and we did a thing that will never see the light of day. And it was basically a test, a little short film to basically test out a bunch of stuff. And to kind of prove out the pipeline. And I just remember on set, all this sort of theory, this year and a half or so of theory that had gone into this moment, and all of a sudden it just clicked on set, and I realized that these compartmentalized pieces of me were all clicking together. I've always liked long take. I've always liked entirely practical sets, and I don't like. I think for actors, it's a much better situation if everywhere they look is real, and there's not, fat grips over here and lights in their eyes over here, and, they're kind of like awkwardly standing so that they look good for the lens. All of those things are what you get for free in theater. And like I said, I did improv, and I like that sort of, on your feet thinking and interacting. And I just was on set directing actors, and it's like, they're like, what is this camera? What are we doing? What? And we were showing them stuff on a headset, and they were trying to wrap their heads around it. And I was like, the camera's a person. He's like, he's in the scene with you. It was actually, we made the camera a character. So it actually, the camera speaks to the people, and they react back and forth to it. And all of a sudden, they were like, oh my God, it's just theater. Where do I look? And it was like, if you want to look at him, the main character, he's right there. And it just, everyone on set just kind of, the pressure release, and it was so fun and so good, and everyone just got it instantaneously, and for me that was a huge moment of just realizing, like, oh my God, everything I've ever wanted to do is all coming, it's all coming together. And then from that, we've just kind of been building and building.
Daniel, how about you?
Yeah, you know, I'm sitting here trying to remember, and I don't even remember my first. I think the only first VR experience I can remember was like in '95 at SIGGRAPH in New Orleans, with some like tadpole thing on a poker boat or something. I don't even know. But this time around, it was probably at a demo booth with a slightly wet, disinfected thing, and I remember thinking that's really gross, but then coming away from it thinking, wow, that was really amazing. So if I could get over that, that's pretty impressive. I think that's probably what switched me over. But yeah, I mean, I like Lucas. I think I saw it, and for the first time in 12 years, 15 years working in the film industry, saw an opportunity to take control of my destiny.
Cool.
And that's palpable.
Deepak, you want in on this?
Yeah, I think it's funny. My tech co-founder brought the DK1 over to my house, kind of similar to you, and I sat in the thing doing the roller coaster ride, and I think I'm like, oh, it's a little funky. But then in the end, what spanning the Bay Area over 3 decades of various disruption. What I found interesting was that this is almost a once-in-a-lifetime disruption, in that 4 distinct platforms are being disrupted simultaneously, whether it's the art of storytelling, whether it's consumerization and adoption, whether it's distribution of content, or tools of the trade. All of them are simultaneously being disrupted right now. And new professions are going to be created, new business models are going to emerge, and in the end, there's going to be an immense amount of opportunity for new companies and new brands to emerge.
Jack, is there a particular piece of content that you've seen that struck you or that you think gave VR a future in your world?
Sure. Well, I would point back to one of the first meetings I had with you, where you actually did a demo based off of a still from one of our film shoots and gave us the imagination to picture what could be possible if we were able to actually have the opportunity to stage a shoot on top of the actual film shoot that would take place. So that was a pretty watershed moment.
Cool, thanks. One thing talking about aha moments, one thing that a friend of mine who's a stock footage guy said to me, and it stuck with me because it was true, is that he was like, oh, I can't wait for VR. And this is a guy who his stock and trade is selling $10, $50 clips online, right? That's what he does. And that's how he makes his money, and he's good at it. He said, everything has to be reshot. And I went, blink, he's right. He was like, dude, stock footage, my entire library, worthless in VR. He was like, everything has to be reshot. The entire content ecosystem has to be recreated for you to do compelling 360 and for you to do VR. He was like, I can't wait until my nature company clients and these other clients sort of warm up to it, because that's a river of work for me, because everything has to be redone. And I was like, wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. It's true. And if you think about it, it's true. You can repurpose some flat content into screens in front of you. I mean, there's movie theater experiences and stuff like that, but you can't make this edge meet this edge behind your head on a flat screen. It has to be reshot, it has to be redone. So I thought that was an interesting comment. I'll ask one or two more questions, and then I'm going to open it up for some questions for the audience. One thing that none of us have touched on at all is this has all been about live action and about distributing live action and doing live action, but there's this whole gaming universe over here that is a huge and important part of the emerging VR market. Where do you guys see live action versus gaming, and are they different? What's going to rise first? What's going to be more important in the market, and where do they fuse? Because I think in 360, interactive and passive are very fluid.
Game environments are already 360.
Yeah, we think about this a lot because it's critical that we predict how things are going to go so that we can ride those waves. You cannot. The only VR that exists today in any real tangible form is cardboard. There is Gear VR, but there's numerically insignificant amount of them in use. So the highest quality content is pre-rendered because it's a cell phone. It can't render beautiful, crazy worlds. So the stuff that we're doing right now with essentially just camera balls, more cameras, or nodal heads, all these things, that's where we are now. Where we're going to have to go is forms of volumetric capture if we're still working with live action talent and real locations. So we're going to have to go to light fields. We're going to have to go to weird, volumetric camera array systems, all kinds of stuff, mocap, all of these kinds of things. The home-based systems that are going to really make VR gaming big, the Vive, the Morpheus, the Oculus, we're not going to see those in any kind of volume until 2017. So we've got a full year to really push this content well. When the gamers kind of arrive and they've got their amazing Ferraris in their living room, the demand for content is going to shift. It's actually really disconcerting to look at pre-rendered stuff when you think you can move, because when you're looking at a video in cardboard, you can't move. But when you put on a Vive and you view pre-rendered content, you, even as a sort of not a veteran, but somebody that's been looking at this stuff for several years, I've taken a step that I wouldn't have taken and made myself just a little tiny bit nauseous for a second. Once people have room scale systems, they're going to want room scale content. And so the types of capture that we're doing, the types of render that we're doing, the types of interactivity that we're doing is going to have to evolve. And that's a steady continuum. Mobile is probably always going to stay in some form of pre-rendered world because you can't have a stack of GPUs really crunching on it. So it's this long rollout that's probably 3, 4, 5 years. And by the time we finally are really digging in, AR is going to be nipping at the heels, and we're going to have to change things again. And a lot of the hardware is the same. So for us, it's as soon as people have something good, they're not going to want to go backwards necessarily, and we have to have plans in place to be able to continue to create the experiences we're creating or want to create as those capabilities expand.
Daniel, you live sort of at the intersection of live action and pre-rendered. What do you think about that? About gaming versus live action and where that intersection is, and who's going to win if there is a winner?
Sure. I mean, I'm a fan of the game engine-based stuff, and I'm equally disturbed when I go into a cell phone experience now because I don't have any head tracking, I don't have any parallax. So I'm actually a huge fan of that, and we're looking at how to potentially bring what would probably run on a NVIDIA 980 or Fury card at 90 frames per second down to a mobile platform, and what does that mean from a production standpoint? How we develop the assets, how we build the textures and lighting models, and all that kind of stuff. But until we actually have rear-facing computer vision tracking basically running on a cell phone, it's not going to matter anyway. So, until Carmack can figure out because they bought one of those algorithms, they've got it. They just have to figure out how to make it not drain your battery in 10 minutes. So, I think that's gonna happen, and I'm actually much more interested in that because of the potential to give a broader experience to the person observing or being, or whatever we decide to do with their perspective. The opportunity to move around and explore on their own terms.
Deepak?
I mean, gaming's interesting. I mean, you have to also assess what's possible now and what's not possible now, right? And what is possible now is to fundamentally look at the game mechanics and how, and you can create game models and game mechanics and leverage, some of those tactics now versus just completely immersive gaming, right? I mean, so I think if we're able to abstract out some of those things, then layer them together, then it might be an interesting place, right?
Anybody else want to jump in before I open it up?
I would just
Go for it.
second that and say, I think you'll see in the live action photography or pre-rendered space, I think you're going to see some of the things from gamer world migrate into what we do, simply because no one wants to wait 5 years to go to a party, I want to go to the party today. And so
It's
I'm not interested in the party that's in 5 years because, who knows where I'll be then.
And in the
Yeah.
end, it's about how you introduce those game mechanics with content today using social tools, right? And engagement models that are new and interesting.
We
with
can just
existing
simply
content.
give the viewer, we can put branches in the story. Right now, today, we can put branches in a story that will allow the consumer to have a game-like experience with, with live-action photography. And we can also make our live-action photography look like a game if we were so inclined. I don't think we are, but you could do that.
We
Tied?
Oh, sorry,
We've
one-
taught- yeah,
one-
sorry.
One quick second. We developed a technology that would allow us to make video reactive before the Google Shop. We haven't had a project that sort of demanded that, but one of the big things that people are always wringing their hands over is we can't control where they're looking. You can't, but you can wait until they're looking where you would like them to look, and then activate pieces of video, or you can do things that are being rendered in real time mixed with video, and so. We're looking for the right project to put that on, but that is absolutely 1,000% possible today, where we can swap out video content to make it randomized, or we can actually make it reactive. We can also blend still and video. DV-ROM games were huge at that. They really pioneered the concept of just a tiny little video window in a much larger still canvas. All of those techniques are ready to go, totally available. We can do branch narrative. We can do interactivity. It's just a matter of getting, right now, the stakeholders, to pay for it.
I'll also throw out just a real quick personal story. A team that I worked with a lot. We did an early test where we created a 360 from a still frame. We created a 360 of a sort of a dark, swampy environment, and we created 2 still files. One still file was just a still file. You looked around, and it was 360. The other still file was the same still file, but put into a game engine, and the only change we made is we added one light source, and we added some fog. We added some, it's not really volumetric, but we added some fog in the still frame. Same still frame, same video background. Those are the only 2 changes. Showed it to several people. On average, people looked at just the still file for about 3 or 4 seconds. People stayed in that same still file with just those 2 additions for about a minute. Looking around, because it was interactive, and that's one thing that I think is different, is that a game engine is not just for gaming. A game engine can add to live action and add interactive elements that really pull people into a story in a much more efficient way.
When you talk about game engines and interactivity, there's a level of expectation from a younger audience that is really about agency. And the choose your own adventure type of thing is like level 0, right, or level 1. And it goes up to level 10, which is, I think, to your question earlier about the game engine. Like, that's real interactivity, when you can actually alter and have agency in your environment.
Sure, that's not a bad point, and actually, I was about to open it up for questions, so that's as good as any. I think, though, that I've seen a lot of choose your own adventure is sort of is simplistic's not the right word, but it's a basic statement, because that implies just sort of a simple narrative branch timeline, and there are things that can be done where it's only specific parts of the screen branch or do certain things. There's a lot of different capabilities there. So we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to open it up for questions from anybody for the audience, for any of the panelists. Yes, sir.
So I'd like to hear from each of you on this. What is, in your opinion, the greatest long-term barrier? Greatest barrier to long-term acceptance of virtual reality as a hot medium?
Jack, why don't you start?
The best analogy I can make in the theatrical environment is 3D, which is it, as opposed to the use of sound or the use of color to enhance the story, it's used more as a device and not a more central component to how you would experience a narrative. So I think from a longer form feature film perspective, that's what I believe is certainly the biggest long-term challenge for me when I think about what a moviegoer would look for.
Deepak?
It's a difficult question because there's so many barriers, but yet there's so many opportunities. a lot of it is going to depend on the results of this kind of religious war between the platforms that's happening between big companies. And there will be a winner that emerges, and until that actually happens, we don't really know what's going to happen, right? Because you know, who's fastest to market with the most complete solution may not be the winner, right? You look at some of the older platform battles between, I mean, anybody remember Minidisc, right? And so, so the barrier for the rest of the market is going to be dependent on some of these platform battles that are going on right now.
Yeah, I would second that. I'd say the short-term commoditization of hardware. I mean, nobody cares what TV I have if I invite them over for a game, right? So the same thing's really, you know, hopefully going to happen in VR because it'll just make everybody's job easier to create stuff for it. The sort of the equalization of parity between like mobile and what you could potentially do at home, even though, you know, that's probably never going to happen unless desktop PCs die.
Yeah.
And also just content. So.
Story might be the absolute wrong word to use in terms of VR. VR is about immersive environments, maybe. It's about agency. It's about interactivity. Maybe it's even about poetry. But story takes us back to the world of movies. I just don't think story is what VR is about.
Well, story takes us back to the Greeks and theater and telling stories around campfires about the stars. I think it's intrinsic to our soul as a human being to tell stories, even if it's not cinematic as we understand it today.
Andy, go for it. What do you think's the greatest long-term battle?
I feel like VR is like it's a child being born right now, and obviously there's danger at every turn. It could, you know, something really bad could happen. But I don't think that there's anything that I could point to as like this looming danger. You know, everyone simultaneously decides that they hate it. You know, like there's so many things that could happen that I don't think are going to happen. There's a freight train of momentum behind VR. There's people changing careers entirely. There's so many companies and so many billions of dollars being piled onto it. I'm not saying it's too big to fail. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to be the next big thing, but I don't think that there is an existential threat that it's facing that we all need to be worried about. I think it's more that we just need to build it right and all be focused on improving it and not making people sick, not boring people, not, you know, doing all the things we could do that could, you know, slow its adoption or slightly ding its reputation.
Lucas?
I'll be the lone contrarian. I think that the two biggest dangers for VR are cat videos, you know, quote unquote. People just shooting stuff just because they can, because, oh, I have a GoPro and I have a plastic holder that is patented now. No one else can have it. And I'm going to run around with my plastic thing and my prosumer camera, and I'm going to shoot, you know, a sunset in VR and post it. And I think a kind of the YouTubeization, if you will, of media has done some damage actually to what consumers expect. I was a long time ago consulting for Nokia, and they were sort of talking about, you know, how they saw the world. And one thing that they said that I really agree with, they did a lot of other things wrong, but the one thing that they did was they 100% rejected that content should be free. And so I think that the other problem with this content right now is, with all respect to how we're all sort of getting to do it, which is we're getting to do it, sponsors are paying for it. It's being paid for as marketing. From a consumer point of view, that means you get it for free. And, you know, you saw the announcement today of YouTube Red, and they're finally putting a buy button on this. You know, I had lectures from people who work at YouTube telling me that, you know, content needs to be free. I had Chris Anderson saying it needs to be free, and all these idiots, frankly, saying it needs to be free. Content is not supposed to be free. You're not going to get my time or anybody that I know who knows what they're doing if you insist that the content is free. So don't insist that the content is free. I don't care if you pay 10 cents. Pay something. When you don't pay, you get lousy content. And when you get lousy content, that will kill it. That lack of a business model and the boringness of free content, of a bunch of college kids running around going, I'm just going to film, my grad party and put it up on YouTube, or I'm going to film the unboxing of a cool piece of tech and call that content. I'm not saying there's no place for it, but we are awash in this stuff. And there's this kind of like weird feeling, in all humility, that we should all just, Taylor Swift just made a whole big stand saying, hey, I'm writing these songs and I'm creating them, and I don't think that they should go on an ad platform where I can't even tell who's listened to it, let alone get paid for it. And it's not fair of you to ask me to do that. It's not reasonable. I'm creating something out of nothing, and someone should pay something for that. So what we can do to protect this medium and any medium from extinction is pay something. Don't expect it to be free. Pay 10 cents. When my kids, God love them, were experimenting with LimeWire, I was like, don't do that. Do not go onto a torrent site and rip off artists' content. I will give you the money to go buy whatever you want. Go buy it on iTunes or wherever you want to buy it. Don't steal it. That's the thing that every time there's a new medium, there's like this weird expectation we have now that it should be free. Like, no, it's expensive to do this. That camera's $500,000. It's not free. So it's incumbent on all of us to find ways to kind of do high quality work to keep it alive and to get someone to take a risk and pay for that. Initially, that may be sponsors and people like Jack and whatever who are supporting what we're trying to do, and we can tuck in with them on their products that are saleable. Eventually, it needs to be a freestanding thing where people will pay for it on its own merits. And you, not just as people who make this stuff, but also you can propagate the message of don't expect this stuff, don't expect something for nothing. It's hard to do this well.
And I'll actually jump in there on one quick thing, is that I believe that the VR market or any market is not determined by the first view, because everybody wants to see VR this first time. It's determined by the second view. It's determined by who wants to see it again and again and again. And crap content destroys the second view, in my opinion. So just my personal take. Other questions? Yes.
About this story idea, could it be that we are, personally, there's a lot of questions that I think about story and about non-story, like the idea about primitive cinema and narrative cinema. Maybe it's all of it, because I could go through a walk in the jungle, but really well done, like really beautifully done, like a photograph. Maybe there's a story, or maybe the person in the VR finds the story, but narrative is completely different.
So what's your...
I understand the question, because can I answer you? Because I kind of get what you're saying, and your partner said it already earlier.
Go for it.
I think it's like a blending.
There is no one way to do anything. There is no right answer, so it's not like we have the answers. But I would say this. Life, we see 120 degrees. I have a head that's on a swivel. I can look around. I can look behind me and all that. And so as a human being, I have the capability to experience the world in 360 degrees-ish. And wherever I look, I get an image. Most of life is pretty boring. And the reason that narrative has taken hold of us is because we added out the boring parts. And so even in VR, even just because you have this tool where you can see in 360 degrees doesn't mean that that's inherently interesting. It is no more interesting than just standing around looking, maybe you enjoy looking at a sunset for 5 minutes, but you're not looking at a sunset for 3 hours. It's not happening. So narrative has a role even in 360-degree video. What you're calling story is narrative. You have to apply some editorial choices to what people see in order for them to have a good time. Because honestly, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and she does not have the attention span of a tsetse fly. If you do not grab her in the first 5 seconds, it's over. And when my 25-year-old daughter gave it a minute. My 7-year-old, it's literally seconds. It's accelerating. There's no version of them waiting for us to, they're not going to hang out hoping it's good. If it's not good right away, forget it. It's over.
Yeah.
Good. We have a couple of minutes left. Other questions? Anybody? Anybody? For anybody in the audience? Bueller? All right. Any final thoughts from any of you guys that you want to jump in on? No? All right. Well,
I think to your point, Lucas, I mean, the bottom line is you speaking to your barrier as well, it can't suck, right, for the end user. It's just the entire experience, whether it's the content, how you interact with it, how you're experiencing. You can't be at a Starbucks with a thing on your head, and you know what I mean? It just can't suck all the way around. That will be a huge barrier.
All right. We'll wrap it up with the statement, "It can't suck." Want to thank all my panelists. Give them a big round of applause for coming.
Better not.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.